Good morning, guys. How's it going? Just getting the stream going here, and there's about 3 minutes, and then we can get the lecture started too. Hope you've had a good week as we reach the weekend. Hi there, Elif. Julia, how's it going? Hey there, guys. Ryan, Eloise. Kylie, what's up? Morning, Nina. All right, just another minute here. Hi, Alex and Stephen. Yeah, so Stephen, I'm going to send that second essay prompt today, actually. I was just making some edits to one of the prompts. Anyway, I'm going to send it off today, and I'm also going to extend the due date by 2 days, so that instead of being due on Monday, what would that be? Instead of Monday the 3rd, it'll be Wednesday the 5th. So you get a little bit of extra time, and we will open with the paper prompt on Monday. So that'll give us a little more time to finish up the current topic, and then the third topic for the paper that you could choose to write on has to do with the next subject that we're going to start. So I thought I would at least get that started before I issue the prompt. But you'll get the equivalent amount of time, and not to worry about that. So basically, over the weekend, you can start looking at the prompts and developing your thoughts, even working on a draft if you like. But you could also hold on until Monday when we go over it in more depth as a group. Okay, guys, well, welcome back. It's now 9 a.m., so I'm just going to get things started. Thanks again, as usual, for being here, and try to leave behind some type of comment at some point so that I can keep the little informal attendance record going. And yeah, what I was just saying to Stephen is that I'm going to send off the essay prompts later today during the office hours, actually. So I'll mail the office hour link in case anyone wanted to stop by. But basically, they're always from 11:30 to 12:30. And during that time, while I'm doing my office work, I'm going to deliver the paper prompts to the class. And I'm going to set the due date for that second paper as Wednesday, May 5th, which will be a slight adjustment from the original syllabus, which said Monday, May 3rd. And we'll go over those prompts in really good detail on Monday when we come back here. So that'll be coming up, just to keep you aware. Anyway, other than that, today the first order of business is to try and complete the last few notes from the David Lewis article. We started talking about him at the tail end last meeting, and there are just a few extra things left. So let's try and go back to that. Trying to find the best marker here. I got a bunch of them. Okay, this one looks pretty good. Okay, so once again, we are returning to the material of David Lewis, great 20th century American philosopher who lived from 1941 to 2001. And this is his paper from 1976 called The Paradoxes of Time Travel. Paradoxes of Time Travel by David Lewis. And what I was explaining last time at the beginning of talking about this author and the essay is that he has a pretty straightforward thesis, even though it's about a pretty heady and intricate topic. But the thesis is simply that time travel is possible. It's possible. It's not logically contradictory or inconsistent. So he defends the consistency of some possible time travel situations or scenarios against a host of suggested paradoxes that some people would argue make it seem like it's not possible. The first paradox that he wanted to deal with has to do with what is the definition of time travel. And what he says it is time travel is a discrepancy between two different measurements of time. To make that even easier to understand, I gave you the example of a person who walks into like a cylinder, and we imagine that they walk in at, let me say, 12:55 p.m. In the afternoon on their watch. That's the time that they walked in. They spend 5 minutes inside relative to their watch. So as they get out, their wristwatch, which is of course on their body and traveling with them, whatever, if they're a time traveler, so is the watch. So if they spent 5 minutes inside relative to themselves and then they get out, it wouldn't be a time machine if all the clocks just say that now it's 1 p.m. That would have just been standing in a cylinder or a shipping container for like 5 minutes and then just getting out. And 5 minutes passed for everybody else too. So that wouldn't really be time travel in the interesting sense. So what would be time travel, let's say, to the future? If he gets out and it was 5 minutes later on his own watch, but all the other watches and people are further into the future than 5 minutes. So like if he gets out and it's 3 p.m. for everybody else, but 1 p.m. on his watch, then that's a discrepancy between the measurement of time shown on his watch and the measurement of time that would be shown by anybody that's an external observer who watched him get in at 12:55 and get out at 3. So how can the same two events be separated by two unequal amounts of time? How can it be, for example, that it's 5 minutes on the one hand in the cylinder and to all outside observers, 2 hours? Well, he says the way of explaining that is to invoke the two different time frames of, what were they? Can anyone tell me this as we review that point? He said there are two different ways to think of time, or two different time frames, if you will. What was the terminology that was used by the author to kind of help with this supposed puzzle? That's right, Stephen, personal and external time. So personal time would be time as experienced by the individual time traveler as shown on their personal wristwatch. And then external time would be time as experienced and measured by all external observers and clocks. So in a way, then, we get to have it both ways. We say that there were 5 minutes of personal time in the cylinder, in my example, and 2 hours of external time. And this is actually not logically impossible or contradictory to say that there were two different units of time separating entering the cylinder and exiting, because according to the space-time theory of Einstein, objects which have different states of velocity actually do occupy a different time frame from other objects that are not in the same frame of reference. So since time dilation is a proven phenomenon having to do with the theory of relativity, it's not at all impossible for one person's experience of time and passage of time to be far different from another one if, for example, we had the ability to master the forces that would cause this type of time dilation phenomenon to exist. So there we go. That explains away one possible paradox. How can the same two events be separated by two different amounts of time? And he says that basing off of this distinction between personal and external time, we can make sense of other puzzling expressions like this one. He calls attention to a statement like this. What if somebody told you that soon I will be in the past? That looks like it's a contradictory statement, because soon implies like subsequent to this, like at a future point in time, I will be in the past. So how is that possible? How can it be that like later on I'll be back in time? You can imagine a person that's about to get into one of these machines, if, for example, they existed, and says, isn't this cool? In like 10 minutes, I'm going to be watching the Beatles perform live at Yankee Stadium. It sounds like an impossible statement to say that in 15 minutes of time, I will be 50 years into the past, or whatever it is now, 55 years into the past. But the analysis provided that involves these two different time frames would give us a way of expressing that. It would be to say that in 15 minutes of what? Personal time, I will be 55 years minus in external time. So much for that as one possible paradox. He thinks he's vanquished that one and shown that it does not render the concept of time travel conceptually impossible. So there's yet a couple of other supposed paradoxes that he also has to contend with next. So let me try and give you the next one here. Well, what about this scenario? I want you to imagine that a person goes back in time and they actually have a conversation with their past self in the past. So suppose that you did that, like tomorrow, next week, the Tesla time machine comes out from Elon Musk, and you get the first kind of beta version of it, and it actually is functioning. So let's say you go back and you say, want to go into the year 2012 or something to talk to your, what would that be? Childhood self for most of you, I'm assuming, right? So you go back to the year of 2012 as your current day 2021 self, and you appear back then. And let's suppose that you make contact with your younger self, right? So like, what if it was a phone call? You're back in 2012, President Obama's running things, and you place a little call to your younger self. So now you, the older version, is back in 2012, talking on the other side of the phone line to your 2012 counterpart, the younger version of you. Now here's a question, and he asks it in the course of the essay. So about that particular scenario, if a time traveler talks to themselves in the past, or the future, but whatever. If the time traveler has an interaction with himself at a different time in space-time, how many people are having this conversation? How many people would be having that conversation? So he thinks that to some, this might again appear as though a paradox, because on the one hand, it seems like you could give the answer that there are two people, because to all appearances, it would look as though there's two separate people having the phone call. One person on one side of the phone line, and in a different part of space, a different person, or it appears to be a different person on the other side of the phone line. But then another way of looking at it is that it can't be two people. Now, Chase, you say that it's one person, and I like how you just jumped up and took the initiative to say something on this, because to be honest, yes, that's what the author thinks. The author says that although, looking at the situation as an observer, it would appear to all appearances that there are two. Why would you say that it's perhaps more accurate to say that it's just one person? Let's go further into that. So the one person answer to the question. Why would it be right to say that it's one person instead of two different people? What's the difference between a conversation between two people and this conversation, which you could say is actually happening with one person involved and not two? What's the reasoning behind saying that it's actually just one person? Can you think of a reason why? Because that's basically the answer that the author sides with and defends. But what would be the basis for saying that that's the best analysis of it? What do you think? So you heard the scenario, right? The person's in the past, they're talking to themselves as a younger individual. Well, Nicole, you say it's the same person, but isn't that a bit circular? I'm asking you, why do you think? Why? Why is the question? Why do you think it's the same person? Well, Stephen, I mean, again, you're saying it's the same person because it's the same person. That's a circular answer. Why do you think that it is the same person? Can you give me your reasoning which tells you that you think it is? I mean, just to say it's the same person is a bit begging the question, because the question is it or not? And if you say it is because it is, that's not telling me why you think so. Okay, so Nicole, the two temporal parts of the same person. Very good. Yes, that's exactly what the author will say. Chase, because one being can exist over a bunch of different times. One timeline carries like a bunch of versions of himself. They have the same foundational experiences. That's also very good, Ellie. So let me bring some of those comments together and give you the author's full explanation of why he thinks it is just one person. Well, when you're talking to a different person, like I'm talking to you right now, for example, you don't have a memorial connection to the life and events of that other person. Like me right now, sitting here as I'm giving this lecture and talking to you, the student, I do not have like memories in my head of being you. I don't have memories of like your life from 0 through 18, right? All those years. But if I was talking to my past self, like suppose that I went back to talk to my graduate school version back in like whatever, 2010. And now I'm a professor. I could probably tell the graduate school guy, don't worry, it's all going to work out. Just keep studying and you'll get a job. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that if I was talking to that individual, I would have a memory of everything that led that person up to the phone call. Like I would remember actually getting the phone call, and I would remember being the person who is on the receiving end of the line. So there's a psychological connection between myself and my prior temporal parts, and that does not exist between my current temporal part and any temporal part of a different human subject. So he says that because there is this psychological continuity between the past stage and the current stage, that's why it makes better sense for us to say that it is one and the same person, since they are connected and united through a series of memories. Of course, the earlier stage doesn't have memories of being at the later stage because it's not at that point in the sequence of temporal parts yet. But me, a later point within the same sequence, has those memories. So like, let me show you a space-time diagram to indicate his thinking on this. Actually, I'll draw you two so that you can see a little comparison. So let's say that this is one of the two space-time diagrams. And it's like spatial dimensions, time dimension. Here was a person, let's say it's you, born in 2003. And I'm just going to draw like a normal one where the person doesn't travel through time ever. So they just have their normal existence like supposedly you will have. So they were born in 2003. They lived until 2100. And we just have this kind of graph of their timeline with the little human figures populating the interior. Okay, now in your case, you're born, you take your journey through time and space for however long you exist, and then the timeline ends. And nothing in this sequence like loops back to an earlier point in time. So at any given moment in the timeline, if you cut a cross section, there would just be one temporal part in space at that particular time. But if we had a time traveler, then the shape of their space-time diagram would be different. We'd have this looking diagram. So again, with the two spatial dimensions and the temporal dimension here, we designate the birth year. Now suppose that this is you and it's like time travel. So you live, and like here will be the end later on, 2100. But let's say that 2021, that's when those time machines hit later on in the fall, right? They come out. And at that point, you decide, you know what, I want to go back to whatever, like a point in my high school years, go back to 2017 and see what my freshman year version was doing and interact with them. So if this was your streak as a time traveler, then at 2021, we would see a zigzag back to 2017. And then whenever you were done doing whatever, you'd zoom back ahead and you'd continue your timeline into the future from there. Now, in this case, if we are drawing a cross-section through times that are prior to 2017, like here, there's just one temporal part. And if we draw a cross-section at times that are later than 2021, after all this time travel business is over with, then we'll just see one temporal part right there too. But if we draw a cross-section through the 2017 year, what we're going to see is that there's two temporal parts. They're both part of the same time sequence, so they're connected in this sequence of stages that forms this zigzag structure. But one of the temporal parts is earlier in the timeline from this point, 2017. The second temporal part is also in 2017, but it's a subsequent stage that's later on in the sequence. So as you can see, cutting through this cross section, we have one temporal part here, another one there. Suppose that the person made a second trip back. They're like, wait, I left my phone back in 2017. I can't leave that back there. So they go back a second time, and they get the phone, and then they go back to 2021 and continue their life from there. In that case, when we cut the cross section through, there will be three temporal parts. The initial young person from 2017, the part of the person that took a trip back to interact with them, and then the second part that's also there to take a second trip back to get the phone. So with each additional trip to the past, you would generate another temporal part of you that's located in space at the same time. For all of us, though, since we don't have the means at our disposal to achieve time travel technologically, there's only ever one temporal part of you in the world at a time. But of course, I mean, if time travel was real or something like that, then there would be more of them if you went back to a point in time where you existed in the past or future. So Alex, what do you say? So would you remember the situation from both perspectives? Well, the younger individual is not going to remember things from the future, obviously, Alex. Right now, try to remember your wedding. I mean, I'm assuming you're not married yet, so you can't remember something that hasn't yet happened. This part along the timeline doesn't have access to the future stages experiences, but subsequent stages in the same process can, of course, remember all the things that happened before. So it's not bidirectional, the concept of memory. You remember the past, but you can only speculate about the future if you have not yet experienced it. So the past temporal part cannot remember what's happened in the future because memory is about the past. Does that make, hopefully that makes sense, Alex, but I like the question, so hopefully it clears it up for you. Anyway, then, that's his answer. He says there's really no such paradox here. It's just one person, but it's two temporal parts of the same person. Claire, so that means we might have time travelers amongst us now, right? If a time machine is invented in the future, they would be able to travel to 2021. Sure, I guess it's a conceivability, but once again, for this kind of technology to exist, we would have to be able to really master the forces of space and time. We would have to be able to create things that could warp space and time in such a way that you could like go into a wormhole and come out in a different point in space-time. But it's not very likely, I think, that the actual achievement of this technology will ever materialize. But since it's a theoretically conceivable thing, it's interesting to ponder. What I've heard some people say is that we might be able not to send whole human bodies into the past because there's too much matter here and that would take too much force. But maybe little bits of information could be sent back. If that was possible, how interesting would that be? You could send little pieces of information to the past to try and help people that didn't know these things. But then again, it's like in the SpaceTime diagram, that message going into the past would have already been there for all eternity. So it's not like you'd necessarily inform them of something for the first time that they didn't have on the first go round, if that makes sense. It's pretty hard to conceptualize the ability to send info to the past, but I've read some papers that say it's not outside the realm of possibility. Okay, so anyway, then we've talked about the concept of the multiple versus one person hypothesis. Lewis says it's one. Let me read maybe from him, and you can see his way of putting that. A time traveler who talks to himself on the telephone perhaps looks for all the world like two different people talking to each other. But it's not quite right to say that the whole of him is in two places at once, since neither of the two stages involved in the conversation is the whole person, or even the whole of the part of him that is located at the time of the conversation. What's true is that he, unlike the rest of us, has two different complete stages located at the same time in different places. What reason have I then to regard him as one person and not two? What unites the stages into a single person? And he says, I answer that what unites the stages is the same sort of mental continuity and connectedness that unites anyone else. The only difference is that whereas a common person is connected and continuous with respect to external time, the time traveler is connected and continuous only with respect to his own personal time. So that paradox he thinks he's taken care of and eliminated from concern. The next one then is this. What about the ability to change the past? Now that's where we really get into a deep and perplexing paradox, perhaps, about time travel. Could a person, for example, go into the past and alter events from the way that they happened initially? On the one hand, it seems like that's not possible for reasons that I'll try to explain. But on the other hand, to some intuitions, it might seem like, why not? If you're there in the past, why shouldn't you be capable of taking whatever actions that anyone could take if they're present in a particular point in space? So he gives us this little scenario to consider, and this is kind of like the most famous hypothetical scenario in his weird and interesting paper. So he asks us to imagine the case of a person, let's say, named Tim. I don't know if Tim is a pun, like Tim Time, but anyway, it's Tim. And Tim is our character who basically, he hates his grandfather. I don't know why, but he has like a huge burning hatred for his grandfather, and that makes him want to kill the grandfather. But there's a problem, though. The problem is that his grandfather's already dead. He's long gone. And you'd think that that would be enough for Tim, but no. He's like, I'm not satisfied with the fact that he's already passed away. I want to be the reason that he died. Like, I want to be the reason that he died back in the past, not natural causes or something else. So he's inherited a lot of money from the grandfather's wealth, and he decides to use it to build a time machine. And once the time machine's been built, Mr. Tim decides that he's going to try and take it back to the year of, let me get the year correct. 1921. He's going to go back to 1921, 100 years back. And what he's going to do back then, or try to do, is to assassinate his grandfather when he was still young and in his prime. Because what happened in actual fact was that his grandfather lived a full, long life and, passed away of natural causes much later than that. But Tim is determined to try his best to stop that and to kill the grandfather back in 1921. So anyway, Tim goes back to 1921. But if he succeeds in this, there's going to be some problems because Tim obviously does exist. He was born, right? But the reason that he was born is because his parents conceived him. And one of those two parents of Tim is obviously the child of the grandfather. Now, if the grandfather is killed in 1921, that's a time and date before he ever conceived this parent of Tim. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, if Tim goes back to the past, what's our question? The question is, can Tim kill his grandfather? Can he actually succeed in the action? And the reason that seems to be a paradox to some is because it looks like the answer yes and no are both somewhat reasonable or intuitive. So can Tim kill his grandfather in 1921? Okay, can he? I don't know. Let's think about what you might say. Well, let's try and go through both possible answers because David Lewis does that. He says, really, we could sort of make it appear as though either answer has some justifiability. So let's try and say why a person might claim that he cannot do it. According to what basic reasons would you say that if you just think about the scenario here, he will not be able to succeed? It's just not possible. Why is it perhaps impossible for him to succeed in this little mission to take out the grandfather in the past? I think if you watch enough movies or if you're just a clever, observant person, you'll definitely be able to tell me something. Why would you say that, whether you agree or not, some would say he can't do it? Let me know. You're stumped on this? I mean, it shouldn't be that bad. Why do you think he would not be able to succeed? Okay, so Grant, he can't because it would prevent Tim from existing in the first place. Yes, exactly. I mean, Tim clearly does exist. That's why he's able to even contemplate going into the past with this time machine. But if he destroys his grandfather in 1921, then that will eliminate the precondition for his own birth. And if that was the case, then who killed the grandfather? A person that was never born? It doesn't make sense. I mean, look at yourself, right? You exist, right? We all know you were born. I'm happy about that. But that's already done. So in this universe that we are in, can't you agree that there's no way to edit that out? I mean, it's already happened. It's a fact. Your birth cannot be somehow deleted with all the events and experiences that you've yet so far gone through. So it appears that on one way of looking at it, of course he can't succeed because we already know how the story ends. The grandfather ends up conceiving a child, which ends up becoming one of the parents of Tim, and Tim then is born in the future date. So if all those events happened, it would contradict the timeline of events for him to both have been born, but also to remove the condition that made it possible for him to be born. So this seems like it's a logical contradiction, therefore he cannot succeed. On the other hand, though, Lewis does try to give some justification for the other reaction. A person might say, on the other hand, well, why not, though? He is in the past, and he has a gun, and he's very well trained, and he's fully intent on committing this act. So why shouldn't he be able to succeed just as much as anybody else? Well, Lewis has, I think, what is a great and interesting response to all this. So here's the way he tries to reconcile the difficult question of whether he could succeed or not. He says, well, for the universe to remain consistent and not to bear contradictions, then no, he won't be able to succeed. But in a way, though, when we think about the word can, like what a person can do, this word can is actually, he says, ambiguous because it has two different possible interpretations. So he says there are two different interpretations of the word can, the narrow interpretation and the broad interpretation. So that helps, he thinks, to clear away this so-called paradox. So let me write this down. Two different interpretations of the word can. So we're going to really get really deep because we're going to actually interrogate the word can itself. What does this word actually say? Two different interpretations of the word can. One he calls the narrow interpretation, or the narrow sense of the term, and then the other one is the broad sense of the term. So the narrow sense of the term can is just what a person is able to do, what they can do, given a more narrow range of factors about them. So what a person is able to do given a narrower range of facts about them. And then the broad interpretation of the word can is the same, but just replacing the word narrow with broader. So what a person is able to do given a broader range or set of facts. Okay, so narrow sense of the term can and the broad sense of the term can. To make that clear, I'm going to use an example really fast. Let me see one thing here. Yeah, so quick question. What would be your most natural answer to this question that's just directed at you? I'm asking you, can you speak Russian? And what would be your answer on that? Without thinking about it too much, you'd probably say something. What would you say? I'm asking, can you speak Russian? Simple. Only you know the answer. What's the answer? Answering this and going into the discussion that follows will help us clarify the point here. So question, can you speak Russian? And Nicole, you're saying no. And I'm thinking probably, I don't know, that's only one response, but I mean, there's like 20 people here. What about the others? No? Okay, yeah. So I would assume that, generally speaking, it's not the most common second language for people in America to learn. So probably most of you will say no. But let me ask the question in a slight different way, and then maybe we'll get a slight different answer. What if I ask you this? In comparison to like a cat, can you speak Russian? when I compare you, a human being, against a cat, the question is, can you speak Russian in that way of comparing you to the other life form or species? Can you speak Russian as opposed to a cat? Now, what would you say is the answer there? Right, yes. So we've gotten now two different opposite answers. The first question, when I asked simply, can you speak Russian? You say no. And then when I say, well, by comparison with a cat, though, could you speak Russian? And you say, well, yes. Now, in a way, we're having it both ways, but it's because there's two different senses of the word can. Okay, so now one sense of the word can refers to what you can do when we consider a bigger picture set of facts about you. And another sense of the word, that's the broad sense. But the other sense of the word can is what you can do with regard to a more narrow range, like a more limited set of facts. So in which sense of the word can do you say that you can speak Russian? Like in comparison to a cat, you can. And that is, what do you think? The big picture sense of can or the more narrow sense of it? The sense in which we are saying you can, like at least in theory, speak Russian. This is in which sense? The big picture or the little picture sense of can? So, following my question, in which sense of can is it that you can speak Russian? No, Nicole, come on. It's according to the bigger picture sense, because can anybody else understand why? It's because if it has to do with your abilities as a human life form. So you are a human being with the cognitive ability to acquire a language if you really wanted to, like focus on it, study it, and take a class in it, and like learn the grammar and vocabulary of it. So you have that ability to learn it if you really put your mind to it. So in that sense, you can, right? That's a big picture sense. But in the narrow sense of the word, you say, no, I can't, because in that sense, we're not focusing on your cognitive capacities as a life form of a human being, but rather your current exposure to the language, given what you've learned so far in your life. So obviously right now, today, you can't speak it because perhaps you have not yet studied it or tried to learn about it. And that's a narrower sense of the word can. But if we open up the big picture and talk about, well, after all, you are a human being, and human beings in principle can learn new languages if they really wanted to or tried really hard, then that bigger picture sense, when we include this range of factors that doesn't just talk about your current knowledge, but your abilities as a human, now we would say that you can. Okay, so it's kind of like talk about running a 5-minute mile. That's something that I have an ambition to do, and I've still not quite got there, but last year I was at 5:21, and that's pretty fast. I say to myself, I can run a 5-minute mile, meaning that I think that if I trained hard enough and really got into peak condition, that it would happen. But I guess today, at my current level of fitness, I'm a little bit off of my peak, and so I don't think I can today at my current training level. But I think that I can in the big picture, like just as a human that's able to somehow get to that point. So anyway, now we have distinguished two senses of can. And returning to the question at the top, can Tim kill his grandfather in 1921? Lewis says that we kind of get to have it both ways. So in the big picture sense of things, when we consider the fact that he, after all, was born and his grandfather did conceive his parent, when we look at that big, broad picture, it looks like what? He can't. He can't if we consider the fact that he's from the future and he was born. So therefore, any annihilation of his grandfather would contradict the fact of his own birth. So that's when it seems like he cannot. In the big picture sense of can, it looks like he can't. But if we're just looking in tunnel vision at the fact that he's there with like a rifle pointed and he's got his training going and he wants to do it, it makes it seem like, yes, he can in that narrow sense of the word. Now, as Lewis has argued, metaphysically speaking, the universe can't contain contradictions. Like, for example, your birth cannot also not have happened. So he thinks that when and if Tim makes his attempt, he's doomed to fail. But when he fails, it's probably not going. It's not going to be like Guardians of Time swoop down and like cause the gun to turn into a banana or something. But rather, it's going to be he'll just witness the failure of the attempt for some mundane reason. Like at the last moment, the gun will jam, or like Mr. Magoo, his grandfather will reach down to pick up the newspaper and the bullet will just whiz right over his head and then he won't get another clear shot. Or he'll think that he killed his grandfather, but it was a case of mistaken identity and he shot somebody else that didn't actually end up becoming his grandfather. But whatever happens, we know that despite his best efforts, he won't be able to successfully accomplish the act that would have prevented his own birth later. So anyway, and also because of the fact that in space-time theory, all the moments exist at all times, it's not like his trip back to the past is like happening for the first time. He's already got a temporal part located in 1921. And so the failed attempt is inevitable because it's already written into the scope of all events in space-time. Now, that's kind of where his essay ends, but I want to say this because I think at the last point, as we finish this topic of time, I try to bring home some of the deep metaphysical significance of all this time travel discussion for you, because I understand that you could read it and learn about it and think it's cool, but it's pretty far away from anything that has to do with life that I live. But if you're a deep thinker, there's one thing about it that I think is really significant and that resonates with me. This distinction between the two notions of can, if the space-time theory is correct, it does not just apply to time travelers. It applies to people of all kinds at all times. Because on the space-time theory, every moment of your entire existence is fully set out in the space-time structure of the universe. So your whole space-time diagram, with all the temporal parts stretched out like an accordion there, they already all exist. And so if that is true, let me ask you some questions. You're watching this lecture right now, I guess. You're tuning in and you're attending, which I appreciate. So I know that you're present for the moment at this meeting. But here's a question. Do you think that you could have missed today's lecture? Would it have been possible for you not to be here right now, even though you are? Do you think that you could have possibly not attended? What do you think? Is there any chance that you might not have been here today at this meeting? What do you think? Alex, you say yes. Okay. In what sense of the word can do you think that it could have been that you didn't make it to the meeting today? Well, you're thinking things like this, Alex. Maybe you might have overslept, or maybe you might have had an internet outage, or maybe you might have just decided that you wanted to do something different with your Friday morning. And if you had made that decision, I guess what you're thinking, Alex, is that you wouldn't be watching this lecture right now, but instead you'd be doing something different from watching this lecture, correct? But according to the space-time theory, Alex, or anyone else, can you understand that, well, no, it's in the narrow sense of can, actually, Alex, that you think that you can have not come, because you're just talking about the choices that you could have made that are different. But in the big picture sense, according to which all of your temporal parts have always existed and can't be changed, in that big picture sense, do you understand how there's a sense in which you could not have missed this lecture? Tell me about that, Alex, or anyone else. According to your current knowledge of this supposed theory, why would a person say that, no, you could not have missed this lecture? And inevitably, you would have had to attend this lecture. And actually, there's nothing that you can do about it, and you couldn't have possibly done otherwise. What sense or justification could be given to that statement based on this theory? In other words, why would a person that holds the space-time theory to be true perhaps say that there's no way that you could have ever done anything otherwise than what you've actually done and then what you will actually do? How come you can't do otherwise, according to this theory? In the big picture sense of the word can, how come you can't do something different from what you actually do? I know it's deep, but just get there. Just think about it. It's deep, so grapple with it and try and say something. Why do you think, according to this theory, no, you could not have possibly missed this lecture? It's part of your destiny to be here, and it's not something that could have not happened. Why? Why are you like Tim, who can't possibly change the past? In the present, you can't change the present either. Why not? Why not? I mean, this is the point. So we're trying to get it out there. Why would you say that, according to the space-time theory, it's not possible for you to have taken a different course of action today? Let me know. Come on, guys. You got to say stuff. You can't just wait for Alex to do it all. Okay, Alex, because you're attending the lecture now and you can't go back and change that. No, that's not it, Alex. Claire, everything is predetermined. Yes. Why? because what already exists? Let me know about that, Claire. You're getting close, and I just kind of want to make sure this is clear. See, Alex, you talk about you can't change the past. But Alex, do you understand that on the space-time theory, you also can't change the future, and the future is fully predetermined? So everything that you will ever do today, tomorrow, and for all time exists already. So the actions that you think you're free to take are not free. There's a predetermined course of actions, and you can't do otherwise than them. Just as Tim cannot alter the events of 1921, you cannot alter the events of 2021. Because all the events are fully set out, and it's not the present moment that's the only one that is real. The future moments are real on the space-time theory. Are we forgetting this, Alex? I think you understand that. So the future points in time are all just as real as the present, just as real as the past. In the same way, Alex, that you think you can't change the past, you have to apply that same thinking to the future. The future's closed also, because the future is a set of events that is already determined, just like the past is already determined. Okay, Claire, you can't change anything because your entire life exists already. Exactly. So I was thinking that more people would jump up and say this because it's really the substance and core of the whole lesson on this time travel stuff. But that's the larger metaphysical significance of it for you. We're probably not going to travel through time, let's be honest, not going to the past or future. But if the space-time theory is correct, the logical consequences of it hold for all objects in space-time, not just time travelers. So you're like Tim, thinking that you have the ability to do counterfactual actions, but really there's only one course of action that's destined for you to do. This is where I find it interesting as a philosophy professor, because you guys, when I tell you about contingent and necessary truths earlier in like cosmological arguments, some students' eyes will like glaze over, like, come on, what do you mean contingent truths? When you say it's something that happened but it might not have happened, I don't even know what you're talking about. The things just happen, and what are you talking about? These counterfactual possibilities. So that's where a person of common sense is like, there's no counterfactuals. What do you mean a different possible world where I didn't do it? I don't understand that. But now I'm telling you there's no such thing as possibility, and there's only the actuality. And now you're throwing up your hands like, wait, there's got to be counterfactual possibilities. Try to do something otherwise. That's a silly thought in a way, because you can't do anything other than actual things, right? Look at this marker. Tell me, am I going to take the cap off or not? I'm going to do it. Wait, no, I'm not going to do it. Actually, yes. Change my mind. Never mind, I'm not doing it. Okay, so look. Did I just do something free? Was the action of taking the cap off of the marker something that was predetermined to happen and I just chose not to make it happen? We'll never know, will we? Because we don't have access to a counterfactual universe. We're in the actual universe, and so there's only one set of facts that ever unfolds. So while you're sitting there thinking about, which major will I pick? Or, who am I going to go out with? Or which state am I going to live in? Which job am I going to take? What am I going to eat today for lunch? And you're thinking you have this menu of options, and you can do like any number of different things. On the space-time theory, that's all an illusion that's just produced by your consciousness, because in physical reality, there's only one set of events that can occur. Okay, so Alex, that's like the deeper picture that I'm trying to get forward here. If you understand now why I asked the question, could you have not attended the lecture? On the space-time theory, the answer is no, you could not have attended the lecture, because this is part of your timeline, and therefore this temporal part has always been there, and it can't possibly be different from the actual series of events that you're witnessing and observing. So I mean, how deep is that? It's very interesting. So I guess that concludes our discussions of time and the metaphysics of time. What we're starting with on Monday is the philosophy of mind. And so I have some meetings ready to go on Descartes' sixth meditation. So we'll begin with him, and then afterwards it's going to be Daniel Stoljar, J.J.C. Smart, and Alan Turing. So we have 4 authors on the philosophy of mind. And when I distribute the paper prompts over the weekend and later today, good, thank you, Alex. When I distribute these paper prompts, they're going to have 3 optional topics. One is going to be on epistemology, theory of knowledge, and one is going to be on time, which we've now talked about. And the third one will have to do with philosophy of mind, which will be the subject that we start on Monday. So anybody who's considering that topic would probably want to wait for at least next week's lectures to finish so that you have more material to work with. But you'll have plenty of time to work on it if that is your choice, because I'm going to extend the deadline for the second paper also to give you that third option if you want it. So anyway, then, I don't know. I don't have much more I can say within the just brief space of 3.5 minutes now. So I think I'll just delay the presentation of our new topic for Monday, but then it'll be a clean break and we'll start on it, in earnest on Monday. So is that all right, everyone? If so, let me know, and I'll be able to close out the meeting, and I'll wish you guys a good weekend. keep track of my announcements. I'll send out the Zoom link for office hours if anyone wanted to come, but obviously you don't need to. So yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Nina, Marin, everybody else. Always appreciate having a nice morning meeting with you guys. So we'll be in touch if you need anything over the weekend. Other than that, have a good one, and I'll see you guys on Monday. Okay. Bye-bye.